In today's episode, we're diving into the most horrific animal attacks ever recorded in the United States. From an elephant's deadly rampage in a crowded arena to a fugitive dragged under in Louisiana's swamps. And it only gets worse from here. Each story grows more brutal, leading to the most shocking attacks ever recorded. July 27, 2021 began like any other quiet summer morning along the edge of Katmai National Park, Alaska. The air was thin and clean, tinged with the mineral scent of glacial runoff and wild spruce. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and pale, and far off in the distance, the grunts of feeding brown bears echoed softly across the Brooks River. It was peak season for tourists hoping to witness something primal. Massive grizzlies catching salmon in midair or lumbering through the water like ancient machines. But deep in the backcountry, beyond where visitors were allowed to go, another man had come seeking something far more elusive, a way out. Nathan Bellinger wasn't a hiker, a photographer, or a wildlife enthusiast. He was a 42-year-old financial advisor from Seattle, and for the last 10 years he'd made a living not through honest work but through careful deception. Nathan Bellinger had spent most of his adult life projecting the image of quiet success. In Seattle, he was the type who always looked composed, pressed shirts, polished shoes, a calm voice that made people trust him. He lived alone in a well-kept condo overlooking the water, drove a modest luxury car, and told his neighbors he ran a private financial firm. There was no spouse, no children, no visiting relatives. His life appeared clean, orderly, and deliberately quiet. The kind of man people assumed had simply made smart choices early and stayed out of trouble. Polished, poised, and charismatic, Nathan had built a career managing retirement portfolios for small business owners, families, and retirees, people who put their trust and their savings in his hands. For nearly a decade, Nathan ran a small but seemingly legitimate operation, offering financial planning and retirement portfolio management to local businesses and aging clients. Behind the scenes, he'd been moving their money into a web of fake companies and shell accounts registered under alternative names. It started small, just a few $100s here and there, easy to overlook, but over time the numbers grew. By the time an internal audit flagged the discrepancies, over $3.8 million had quietly disappeared. Most of it had been rerouted through dummy LLCs and investment firms that only existed on paper, then transferred out of state or offshore. The clients never saw it coming. He didn't wait for the indictment or the handcuffs. Instead, he disappeared into Alaska under a false name, arriving by float plane and heading for an abandoned trapper's cabin he remembered from a guided fishing trip years earlier. It was a long-forgotten structure tucked between two ridges, not listed on any official maps and far enough off the main trails to avoid casual discovery. To Nathan, it was perfect, off-grid, untraceable, and quiet enough to buy him time to think. For the first 2 days, he kept to himself, rationing food and listening to the forest breathe around him. He slept with his pistol beside him and stayed alert, certain he'd been followed even if no one appeared. Then, on the third morning, he found something that confirmed his suspicions. A boot print by the stream bed and a discarded gum wrapper still shining with moisture. Too fresh, too close. Someone had been near the cabin, maybe watching. That was all it took to push him into motion. Katmai National Park is home to one of the densest populations of brown bears anywhere in the world. During summer months, over 2,000 bears congregate across the region to feed on the spawning salmon that crowd the rivers and streams. These are not inland grizzlies, but coastal brown bears, larger, heavier, and more dominant due to their rich marine diet. Males in peak condition can weigh well over 1,000 pounds and display highly territorial behavior, especially during feeding season. Despite the park's reputation for bear viewing, fatal attacks remain rare. Between 1980 and 2021, Katmai recorded only a small handful of serious bear encounters, most involving off-trail hikers or those violating safety protocols. But when those rare attacks occur, they are often swift and impossible to stop. Stuffing his bag with food, his weapon, and what little cash he had left, Nathan set out on foot, cutting through the thick alder and willow, trying to reach the ridgeline where he believed he could find a vantage point or a way out. What he didn't realize was that his chosen path led straight into the territory of a massive coastal brown bear, a dominant male in the area known for aggressive behavior during peak salmon season. Weighing close to 1,200 pounds and scarred from years of combat over food and mating rights, the bear had carved out a territory around the riverbend where the salmon were thickest and competition was fiercest. Nathan didn't see the signs: the flattened bedding grass, the fresh scat, the half-eaten salmon left steaming on a rock. He walked right past them. Focused only on getting away from imagined pursuers, he was oblivious to the very real predator watching from just beyond the tree line. The bear emerged in silence, a wall of fur and muscle that seemed to materialize from the brush. Nathan turned at the last second, just in time to lock eyes with the animal. A deep black stare that held no fear, no hesitation. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Nathan did what so many do when faced with something they can't fight. He ran. But bears are not like men. They do not hesitate, do not second guess. With one powerful surge, the bear crashed through the brush behind him, covering ground with horrifying speed. Nathan sprinted through the undergrowth, heart pounding, lungs burning, until a root caught his foot and sent him sprawling to the ground. He scrambled, tried to push himself up, but the bear was already on him. The first strike came fast, a massive paw crashing down on his back, flattening him into the moss with a wet thud. Then came the bite. The bear's jaws clamped around Nathan's thigh, and with a brutal twist, muscle and skin tore free. He screamed, a raw and broken sound that echoed through the trees, but there was no one to hear it, no one to help. The bear bit again, this time higher, closer to the hip. Nathan's body arched in pain, his hand fumbling toward the pistol, but he couldn't reach it. The bear shifted its weight and sank its teeth into his lower abdomen, lifting and shaking him until blood sprayed in a wide arc across the leaves. His screams became wet and gurgled as blood filled his mouth. He twisted, tried to crawl, tried to survive, but it was no use. The bear was relentless. With a final movement, the bear rose and slammed both forepaws down onto Nathan's back. His spine gave way beneath the weight and his body convulsed. The bear bit once more, this time into the base of his skull, and pulled back hard. There was a sickening crunch, and then everything went still. When rangers located the site 2 days later, they weren't even searching for a missing person. A wildlife biologist had reported hearing something unusual, brief human-like screams, but no distress calls had come through, and there were no hikers officially registered in the area. The recovery team wasn't expecting to find much. What they discovered was a scene that left little doubt as to what had happened. The ground was disturbed and soaked with blood. Clothing was shredded and scattered across the brush. A boot, a damaged backpack, and a partially buried pistol were found nearby. A lower jawbone with a gold-capped molar was recovered a few yards away, along with drag marks leading into deeper vegetation. The rest of the body was never fully found. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Nathan Bellinger. Once identified, the case was quietly handed off to federal authorities. The police had been tracking Nathan for months, investigating a string of embezzlement and financial fraud charges involving several $1 million. With his death confirmed, the case was closed. His family declined to speak to the media. There was no public funeral. The clients he defrauded, many of them retirees and small business owners, were notified of his death, but it brought little comfort. Most of the money was unrecoverable, and with no estate left behind, there were no civil proceedings. The Park Service filed the incident as a fatal bear encounter in a restricted area. No charges were filed and no further search was conducted for the bear involved. Officials emphasized that the man had been trespassing in a closed section of protected land without a permit, far from designated trails or campsites. September 16, 2022 dawned cold and crisp in Montana's Gallatin National Forest, where mist clung to the understory and the sharp scent of pine hung in the air like a warning. Elk rutting season was in full swing, and bugles echoed faintly through the ridges, low and urgent. Gallatin, part of the vast Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, is home to some of the most rugged terrain in the American West. Forest of lodgepole pine and Engelmann spruce laced with game trails and shaded hollows perfect for an ambush. Travis Longmore, 28 years old, knew the area well. He had hunted these woods before, but that day, in a stretch of unmarked timber above a shallow creek bed, something would go terribly wrong. Travis wasn't reckless. Raised in Idaho and based in Bozeman, he worked hard during the week and hunted hard when he could. He preferred bow hunting, closer, quieter, more personal. His compound bow, a Hoyt Carbon RX-3 equipped with Rage broadhead arrows, was tuned to perfection, and his pack was neatly organized down to the last wind checker bottle. Friends called him methodical, patient, the kind of guy who cleaned his gear twice and always left a detailed plan. That morning, he'd driven in before sunrise, parked off a remote fire road, and followed a game trail up through the pines. Around mid-morning, he caught sight of a large bull elk standing broadside near a grove of fir trees. The animal bugled once, turned, and paused just long enough. At 30 yards, Travis took the shot. The Rocky Mountain elk is the largest subspecies of elk in North America. Adult bulls regularly exceed 700 pounds, with racks spanning up to 4 feet wide and tines as long as knives. During the rut, they're high-strung and volatile, driven by instinct and surging testosterone. They'll battle rivals with brutal head-on charges, scatter branches in display of dominance, and when wounded, can enter a final adrenal frenzy that turns even the dying into a deadly force. While most hunters respect the possibility in theory, few ever see it up close. Travis was about to. Following best practice, Travis waited 45 minutes before trailing. The blood trail was steady, rich, and bright red, likely a lung shot. He moved carefully through the brush, stepping over deadfall and ducking beneath low boughs. After nearly 200 yards of tracking, he found the bull lying near a fallen pine, its body slumped sideways and eyes dull. Blood had pooled beneath the animal's chest and its ribcage no longer rose. Travis approached, slowly at first, then confidently. He knocked his bow, lowered it, and stepped into the clearing. He drew out his phone to take a picture. The elk exploded upward. It surged to its feet in a single staggering motion, shoulders heaving, head swinging wide. The first antler caught Travis across the thigh, carving a long gash and sending him sideways. He staggered off balance as the bull turned and charged again. This time it hit full force. One tine drove into his abdomen, another beneath the collarbone. He screamed as he was lifted backwards and slammed against a nearby pine. The bark cracked behind him. He tried to push the elk off, grabbing wildly at its shoulder, but the weight was overwhelming. The bull wasn't striking clean, it was thrashing. Its body spasmed with the last tremors of life, muscles surging, legs kicking up debris as it crushed Travis against the tree. Another jab drove a tine deeper, this time between ribs. Blood soaked his jacket and pooled at his boots. He gasped once, then again weaker. A final lurch from the elk sent him sideways, collapsing into the dirt. The bull staggered, took 2 steps, and collapsed 5 feet away. Both of them lay still. When Travis missed his scheduled check-in window that evening, a friend called the local sheriff's office. A search party formed at first light. His truck was found parked where he'd left it, untouched. Following faint boot tracks and drag marks through the brush, they found the clearing by mid-afternoon. Travis's body was pinned awkwardly against a tree, blood dried into the pine bark. The elk lay nearby, dead at last, its antlers still coated with gore. His bow was buried beneath snapped branches, his phone was found face up in the soil, camera still open but never used. The autopsy confirmed massive internal trauma. 2 of the antler wounds had been independently fatal. The elk had died of its own injuries shortly after the attack, its lungs flooded with blood. Rangers posted a safety notice later that week, reminding hunters, never assume a downed animal is dead, especially when the shot is borderline and the terrain gives it cover. Travis was buried the following Saturday in Bozeman. The service was small, the kind hunters attend in silence. His story didn't make headlines, but across the hunting community it traveled fast, quietly, urgently, like a warning in the woods. It was December 5th, 2023. The winter chill had settled over Portland, Oregon as the holiday season approached. For 6-year-old Loyalty Charles Scott, affectionately known as Mookie to his family, it was just another school day. The first grader at Glenfair Elementary had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday morning would be his last. Loyalty was being raised by his grandmother, Rena Scott, the steady heart of a bustling household. She had taken on the responsibility of raising several of her grandchildren, including Loyalty, and she did so with unwavering love. Her days revolved around them: school drop-offs, warm dinners, clean clothes, and constant affection. Loyalty was her shadow, her joy, and her reason for pushing forward. Everyone who knew Loyalty spoke of the same thing: his radiant presence. Even at 6 years old, he carried a warmth that seemed to disarm the world around him. He smiled constantly, shared freely, and brought light into any room he entered. Teachers noticed how he offered help without being asked, looked out for classmates who felt left out, and made sure no one ever played alone during recess. He had the kind of heart that left a mark. Each weekday morning followed a familiar routine. Rena would drive him to the home of her longtime friend Coco Miller, who then took him the rest of the way to school. Coco had known the family for years. She was a trusted figure in their lives, someone Rena believed would care for Loyalty like her own. But there was something the Scott family hadn't fully grasped, something dangerous hidden behind Coco's front door. Coco presented herself as the head of a dog training and protection business, calling it Canine Protection. Her online persona showed a flair for theatrics, posing with weapons, adopting an aggressive brand. But behind that facade, the real threat lived in her garage. 2 massive, unregistered, mastiff-type dogs, each weighing over 100 pounds and bred specifically for aggression and territorial defense. To her credit, Coco had always kept Loyalty separated from the animals. She understood they weren't family pets. They were trained to respond to perceived threats, and she never intended for him to come near them. But no amount of caution could erase a child's curiosity or predict the split-second decisions of a 6-year-old. That morning, like so many other, Rena dropped Loyalty off at Coco's home. He was bundled in his jacket, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready for school and unaware of the danger that lay just beyond a door. Inside the house, everything was normal. Coco prepared for the day, leaving Loyalty inside while she stepped into the garage to check on the dogs. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Perhaps Loyalty thought it was time to leave, or maybe he just wanted to peek inside. Whatever the reason, he opened the door to the garage, and that single motion unraveled everything. The larger of the 2 dogs saw movement and instantly went on the attack. In an explosion of muscle and instinct, it lunged at the boy, slamming him backward onto the cold concrete. Loyalty screamed. The dog clamped down on his arm, crushing bone and ripping flesh. The second dog, aroused by the chaos, joined in, blocking the only escape. Coco turned at the sound and raced toward the boy, yelling for the dogs to stop. But her voice held no weight against the frenzy now consuming the animals. The first dog released Loyalty's arm only to latch onto his small torso. The second grabbed his leg. Together, they pulled in opposite directions, tearing the child's body with terrifying force. Desperate, Coco threw herself into the melee, grabbing at collars, striking with her fists, anything to break the grip. When that failed, she reached for a bat from a nearby shelf and swung it across one dog's back. It barely reacted. Their focus was absolute. Loyalty's body grew limp beneath them. His screams weakened to whimpers and then fell silent. Blood pooled beneath him. In a final, frantic attempt to save him, Coco threw herself over his body, shielding him with her own and trying to reach a handgun she kept nearby. She managed to grab it, but by the time she looked down, the damage had already been done. Loyalty's chest no longer moved. His eyes were fixed and empty. The realization shattered her. The gun slipped from her hand. The dogs, now quiet, slowly backed away, their mouths stained in red. When emergency responders arrived just after 7:30 a.m., they found Coco on the floor, cradling Loyalty's broken body in her arms. He was pronounced dead at the scene. There was nothing they could do. The attack sent shockwaves through the community. At Glenfair Elementary, teachers wept. Counselors struggled to find words for his classmates. Loyalty had been the kind of child who brought joy without trying. His loss left a silence that no one could fill. His grandmother, who had poured her heart into raising him, was devastated beyond words. Friends and family described her as crushed, unable to comprehend how a trusted routine had ended in tragedy. Authorities removed the dogs and euthanized them days later. Months after the attack, Coco Miller was indicted on multiple felony charges, including criminally neglect homicide and first-degree mistreatment. The investigation revealed just how preventable the incident had been. Unregistered dogs, unprotected access, and a child placed too close to a threat that never should have existed. August 26, 2024 began with a dry breeze curling through the Loliondo game-controlled area, just east of the Serengeti. The ground was brittle, grass burned gold by the late summer sun, and the tracks of zebra and lion pressed deep into the dust like scars. This was hunting country, legal, remote, and unforgiving. At sunrise, Malcolm Draycott stood at the front of the lead truck, scanning the plains as the convoy pushed forward. Everything felt in place, but in the bush, comfort is a warning, because the moment things seem safest is when they're about to go wrong. Malcolm was 44, a self-made man with a quiet intensity. He'd grown up outside Houston, the son of a machinist and a school secretary, and worked his way through oil rigs and construction crews until he built a company of his own. He sold it at 38 and walked away with more money than he could ever spend, then vanished from boardrooms and golf courses entirely. What came next was something he called earning a different kind of respect. He trained with professional guides, learned to track and shoot, and began traveling across southern Africa. His name was known in certain circles, not flashy, not loud, but remembered. He tipped well, followed rules, and didn't flinch when things got messy. Outfitters liked him. Trackers trusted him. But underneath the calm was something harder. Malcolm didn't like leaving things undone. And when he set his sights on a lion, it wasn't about thrill, it was about completion. He treated the hunt like a business plan. Every angle covered, every risk accounted for. What he couldn't plan for was the lion he didn't see. By mid-morning, a young male lion was spotted resting in the open near a cluster of stones, his body stretched in the grass, mane tinged with shadow and age. Through his Leopold VX 3i scope, Malcolm steadied his .375 H&H Magnum, drew in a slow breath, and fired. The crack of the shot startled a flock of birds into the air. The lion didn't flinch. He dropped immediately, a clean fall into the brush. The men nodded to each other. It looked perfect. But the savannah doesn't always give you what you see. Sometimes it gives you what you've forgotten to fear. They didn't know it yet, but the lion on the ground wasn't the alpha. It was a younger male, possibly subordinate, possibly trailing the real pride leader. And 40 feet away, obscured by waist-high grass and wind direction, the dominant male had been watching. Malcolm stepped from the vehicle with his rifle at his side and a practiced ease in his walk. He moved slowly, savoring the moment, and stopped just beside the lion's body to nudge the mane with his boot. The guides moved to set up the camera. A few paces back, the trackers stayed alert, though the kill looked routine. Malcolm crouched low to inspect the shot placement, muttering something under his breath, and reached forward to lift the lion's heavy head for a photograph. That's when the second lion struck. There was no growl, no sound at all, just a rush of motion as the hidden alpha burst from the grass at full speed. It hit Malcolm sideways, a blur of fur and muscle slamming into him like a battering ram. The force knocked him completely off his feet. His rifle flew from his grip and clattered against a nearby rock. The lion's jaws closed around Malcolm's neck and shoulder as it dragged him backwards through the dust, shaking him once, then again with terrifying force. His body jerked violently, boots scraping the ground, arms flailing in a brief, stunned attempt to fight back. The guides froze in shock for a heartbeat before scrambling for their rifles. One fired too quickly, the bullet kicking up dust behind the lion's flank. A second round found its mark, grazing the animal's ribcage. The lion didn't let go. It planted one massive paw across Malcolm's chest and drove its teeth deeper, crushing vertebrae and artery alike. Blood sprayed across the grass in dark arcs as Malcolm's body convulsed once, then went slack. A third shot rang out, this time punching through the lion's side. It staggered, snarled, and finally released its grip. The animal collapsed nearby, muscles twitching, blood seeping into the soil as it died facing the body of the man it had just killed. The aftermath was sudden and grim. The trackers, still shaken from the gunfire, scrambled forward and found Malcolm's body sprawled near the carcass of the first lion. His torso was torn open, neck punctured deep, and blood soaked through his shirt into the dust below. His eyes were still open, glazed in shock. His right hand, outstretched toward where the rifle had landed, remained curled as if trying to reach for it even in his last breath. There was no triumphant photo, no moment of pride, only chaos. One of the guides radioed for emergency evacuation, though it was more for protocol than hope. The closest ranger outpost was nearly an hour away, and no one doubted what the outcome would be. They wrapped his remains in a canvas tarp and laid him gently in the bed of the truck. The other lion, the one that had attacked, had already collapsed a few yards away, shot through the ribs by one of the clients, still trembling with disbelief. Malcolm's death was ruled a fatal wildlife incident. Local authorities confirmed the hunt had been legal with all permits intact. No charges were filed, but the hunting company quietly revised its protocols. No more photo ops until the scene was cleared, no more assumptions about lone predators. The party returned to camp in silence, and no further hunts were conducted in that zone for the rest of the season. His remains were flown back to Texas and buried in a private ceremony, attended only by family and a handful of close hunting companions. The story never made headlines, but it didn't have to. Among professional guides and bush veterans, word spread fast, not as gossip, but as a warning. The lion he shot had never been the threat. The real danger had waited, hidden in the grass, close enough to strike the moment the barrel dipped and the cameras came out. Malcolm had done everything right until the second he assumed he was alone. The winter of 2012 brought unusually heavy snowfall to Oxford, Indiana. By early February, the small farming community was blanketed in white, with temperatures regularly dipping below freezing. Most residents stayed indoors, their homes warm havens against the bitter cold outside. But for Marcus Ashmont, 33, and his wife Rachel, 31, the frigid weather was a blessing. It meant their collection of exotic reptiles would remain comfortably docile in their carefully climate-controlled environment. The Ashmont farmhouse stood isolated at the end of a long gravel driveway surrounded by bare trees and snow-covered fields. From the outside, it looked like any other rural Midwestern home. White clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and smoke curling from the chimney. But inside, it was a different world entirely. The couple had converted nearly half of their living space into what they called their reptile room, a humid, temperature-regulated environment housing over 15 snakes, lizards, and other exotic creatures. Marcus had been fascinated by reptiles since childhood. Growing up in Florida, he had spent his youth catching small snakes and lizards in his backyard, gradually developing an expertise that led to a job at a reptile import business after high school. It was there that he met Rachel, a quiet veterinary technician who shared his unusual passion. They shared the same interest, which made their relationship stronger, and they eventually got married. After moving to Indiana for Rachel's job at an exotic animal clinic, the couple had thrown themselves into building their collection. Marcus worked from home as a reptile breeder, selling rare morphs of legal species to collectors across the country. Rachel's veterinary background ensured their animals received excellent care, and their reputation in the reptile community grew steadily. What people didn't know, even their closest friends, was that the Ashmont collection included several illegal specimens. Hidden in specially built enclosures at the back of their reptile room were 3 reticulated pythons, massive constrictors whose ownership had been banned in Indiana following several fatal incidents across the country. The largest, a 16-foot female they called Medusa, had been acquired through underground channels 2 years earlier. The couple had received 2 warnings from local animal control about their collection after anonymous tips, but each time they managed to hide the illegal snakes before inspectors arrived. Rachel had expressed concerns about keeping such dangerous animals, especially after Medusa grew large enough to require 2 people to handle safely. But Marcus had dismissed her fears. Marcus would see them as puppies rather than predators, so her efforts were in vain. February 12th began like any other day. Rachel left for work at the veterinary clinic around 7 a.m., reminding Marcus that it was feeding day for the larger snakes. Marcus spent the morning answering emails from customers and preparing the frozen rabbits that would serve as meals for their largest pythons. Around noon, he entered the reptile room to begin the feeding process. The room was maintained at a constant 85 degrees, with humidity levels carefully monitored to mimic the tropical environments where most of their collection originated. Glass terrariums lined the walls, each housing different species, from colorful ball pythons to emerald tree boas. Marcus followed his usual routine, feeding the smaller snakes first before moving on to the larger specimens. He documented the process for an upcoming YouTube video, setting up his camera on a tripod to capture footage of the feeding behaviors his subscribers found so fascinating. When he reached Medusa's enclosure, a custom-built space with reinforced glass panels, he noticed the latch was slightly ajar. For a moment, he stood frozen, scanning the room for any sign of the massive python. The enclosure appeared empty, but reticulated pythons were masters of concealment despite their size. Marcus carefully checked behind the artificial rock formations and foliage inside the habitat, confirming his fear. Medusa had escaped. Experienced with handling escaped snakes, Marcus wasn't immediately alarmed. The reptile room was secure with weather stripping around the door to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The snake was almost certainly still in the room, likely seeking a warm, dark space to hide. He began a methodical search, checking behind equipment and inside cabinets, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the animal if he found it. But what Marcus didn't know was that the reticulated python had escaped its enclosure hours earlier. As he was looking around, he didn't know that Medusa was already watching him from nearby. The reticulated python was likely responding to the heat signature of Marcus. which made Medusa catch Marcus off guard. Medusa quickly wrapped around his body. The attack was silent and lightning fast. 16 feet of powerful muscle wrapped around Marcus's torso and neck in seconds, constricting with a force that immediately compressed his ribcage. He managed a single strangled cry before the pressure cut off his ability to make any sound at all. His hands clawed desperately at the muscular coils, but the snake only tightened its grip in response. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, capable of growing over 20 feet in length and weighing more than 200 pounds. These constrictors kill not by crushing their prey, but by preventing breathing. Each time the victim exhales, the snake tightens its coils, eventually causing cardiac arrest through oxygen deprivation. With each desperate attempt to draw breath, Marcus's chest had less room to expand. The pressure fractured several ribs, driving bone fragments into his lungs. Blood vessels in his eyes burst from the pressure, and his vision began to darken at the edges. These snakes don't hunt humans, but can mistake them for prey when in close proximity. In his final moments of consciousness, Marcus's hand found his phone in his pocket. Unable to see the screen clearly, he attempted to dial Rachel, but only managed to call a random contact who didn't answer. The phone slipped from his fingers as the python continued to tighten its deadly embrace. At 5:30 p.m., Rachel returned home from her shift at the clinic. Calling out to Marcus and receiving no answer, she assumed he was filming in the reptile room and went to join him. The scene that greeted her when she opened the door would haunt her for the rest of her life. She found Marcus unresponsive on the floor with the snake still wrapped around his torso. Rachel's medical training kicked in immediately. She checked for a pulse, finding none, then began CPR while calling 911 on speakerphone. The emergency dispatcher instructed her to get away from the snake, but Rachel refused to leave her husband. As she continued resuscitation efforts, Medusa began to move again, sensing the vibrations of Rachel's movements. The python's head rose, tongue flicking out to taste the air, and began to slide toward her. Rachel remained frozen in place, torn between continuing CPR and retreating from the increasingly active predator. It was only when the dispatcher shouted through the phone that help couldn't be sent until the snake was secured that Rachel finally backed away, locking herself in the bathroom until animal control officers arrived 20 minutes later. By the time authorities secured the scene and paramedics could safely reach Marcus, he had been dead for hours. Medical examiners later determined that death occurred from asphyxiation due to thoracic compression, a typical cause of death in constrictor attacks. The python had maintained its grip long enough to ensure that even if help had arrived sooner, survival would have been unlikely. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of the Ashmont's illegal collection. Besides Medusa, authorities discovered 2 other reticulated pythons, a black mamba, and several other prohibited species hidden in a false wall compartment. Records showed that the couple had been warned twice by animal control about the risks of keeping large constrictors, with specific instructions to reinforce all enclosures with secondary locking mechanisms, advice they had clearly ignored. Rachel faced criminal charges for possession of illegal exotic animals, eventually receiving probation and a lifetime ban on owning reptiles. The incident prompted officials to implement stricter enforcement of exotic pet regulations, highlighting that the Ashmonts had previously been cited for inadequate enclosure security. The python that killed Marcus was euthanized and preserved as an educational specimen at a nearby university. Rachel moved away from Indiana, cutting all ties with the reptile community. In her only public statement a year later, she warned that no matter how well you think you know these animals, they remain wild predators with instincts that can't be tamed. As the snow continued to fall on the quiet farmhouse in Oxford, the story of Marcus and Rachel Ashmont joined the grim anthology of human-predator encounters. Tales that remind us that for all our technical advancements, the wild still remains wild. It was June 29, 2013, and Yellowstone National Park was just waking up. The morning air was cool and fragrant. Pine sap, river mist, and the distant campfire smoke mingled under a pale blue sky. Sunlight filtered through the tall lodge poles like golden dust, and somewhere far off a raven called into the quiet. In the calm, you could almost forget how wild this place really was. Jason Rutley had always felt at home here. He knew the curves of these trails, the rhythm of the forest at dawn. This was his fourth summer trip in as many years, a tradition he'd built for himself. As always, he'd risen before first light, brewed a thermos of coffee, and headed out alone. Garnet Hill was one of his favorite hikes, secluded, blooming with early wildflowers, and far from the crowds. It felt like Yellowstone's quiet soul lived here. He was a man of habit, tidy, measured. Always locked the car, double-checked the trail map, stored his food in bear-proof containers. He'd even corrected others when he saw mistakes. Last summer, a family had left a loaf of bread on a picnic table, and he'd gently reminded them of the danger. Bears could be anywhere. That's what he used to say. But that morning, maybe it was the long drive the day before or the way the warm sun had made him feel safe, he let a few things slip. He ate a turkey sandwich in the car and dropped the crumpled wrapper on the passenger seat. Just for now, he told himself. He didn't lock the doors. He was only going to be gone for an hour. He returned just after 7 a.m., boots dusty and heart full. He slid into the driver's seat, windows cracked, and leaned back with his thermos watching the trees sway. This was the part he loved, the stillness after motion, the soft creak of pine boughs overhead. The park was so peaceful it felt curated, almost dreamlike. Jason didn't know it, but something was already moving through that dream. Just 200 feet away, a black bear had caught his scent. The bear wasn't new to the area. Like every other bear, it had roamed the stretch of its forest many times, learning from experience that where there were parked cars, there was sometimes food. Bits of trash left behind, a cooler forgotten. It wasn't aggression that drove it, just hunger sharpened by memory. Jason sat in silence, sipping his coffee as the bear approached on soft pads. It circled the car, sniffed the air, then rose on its hind legs, leaned a paw on the door handle, and pulled. The latch clicked. Jason turned, confused. What happened next unfolded in less than 20 seconds. The bear's head filled the frame of the open door, its breath hot and sharp. Jason flinched, reaching with one hand to slam the door shut, but the bear lunged first. A swipe of its paw tore through Jason's flannel and into his chest. He gasped. The thermos clattered to the floor. Then came the second strike, this one to his neck. Blood sprayed across the dashboard. Jason twisted, kicked, tried to shove the beast back, but the space was too small. The car, once a refuge, became a cage. Panic made the air feel thick. His fingers slipped on the gear shift. The bear's weight pressed against him, claws ripping fabric, flesh. It wasn't a long attack, but it was personal, catastrophic. The bear didn't roar, it didn't growl. It just moved with frightening intent, driven by instinct and the smell of food. And just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Maybe it was the sharp metallic tang of blood, maybe Jason's scream, wet, half-choked, disrupted the bear's logic. It huffed once, blinked, then stepped backward and dropped down. Silence returned as though the trees themselves had paused to watch. The bear walked off, disappearing into the pines. Jason remained. His body slumped against the center console, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven gasps. His hands clutched at his throat, but the bleeding was too much. He was alone. No cell signal, no help in sight. And he knew, somewhere in those last fading minutes, that it had all been so close to avoidable. 3 hours passed before a family in an RV noticed the open car door. They slowed, then stopped. What they saw inside stayed with them for life. Park rangers responded quickly, but it was too late. They traced the bear's movements through tracks and trail cameras. It wasn't hard to find. It had returned to the area by a nearby creek. It wasn't aggressive, just expectant. It had learned the wrong lessons. And so the rangers made the hard call. They euthanized it that evening. Jason's death rippled outward, through the park staff, then through the news, and eventually through policy. Yellowstone updated its visitor guidelines, more signs, more education, a new emphasis on the risks of leaving food or trash even for a moment. Because sometimes, even a quiet place with a pretty view can be the last place you ever see. On a cold, blustery day in January of 1872, the town of Bolton, England stirred with anticipation. Smoke billowed from chimneys, mingled with the overcast sky as townsfolk navigated the cobblestone streets, scarves pulled tightly against the winter chill. Near the town hall, a large canvas tent towered over the square, its vibrant banners promising a thrilling spectacle. Inside, the flickering glow of gas lamps lit the interior of Mander's Menagerie, where 500 spectators had gathered to witness one of the most daring performances of the era, Maserati the Lion Tamer. Thomas McCarthy, known by his stage name Maserati, was the star of the evening. A seasoned performer, he had spent years traveling with menageries, building a reputation as a fearless showman. Dressed in a Roman gladiator-inspired costume, he prepared to face 3 lions in a display of dominance and control. Armed with only a whip and a thin sword, he would command the animals to leap through hoops, sit on pedestals, and follow his every cue. For the audience, the act was a mesmerizing blend of danger and artistry. But for the man in the cage, it was a high-stakes dance with unpredictable predators. The lions, majestic and imposing, were among the menagerie's most prized animals. The largest, a black-maned lion from North Africa, was a particularly striking figure. Its muscular frame and sharp amber eyes exuded raw power, a reminder that no amount of training could fully subdue the wild instincts of such a beast. Life in captivity, coupled with the loud and chaotic atmosphere of the performances, often left the animals tense and unpredictable. As Maserati stepped into the cage, the crowd erupted in cheers. The lions moved cautiously under the gaslight, their paws sinking into the sawdust-covered floor. Cracking his whip, Maserati commanded the first lion to leap through a hoop, earning applause from the audience. The second lion followed, crouching low on a pedestal at his signal. But as he turned to the black-maned lion, it hesitated, a low growl rumbling from the deep within its chest. The sound carried across the tent, drawing a hushed murmur from the spectators. Maserati cracked his whip again, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy air. The lion's growl deepened, and it took a single step forward, its body tense and poised. The audience leaned in, unsure if this was part of the act or something more sinister. Then, in an instant, the lion lunged. Its massive body collided with Maserati, sending him sprawling to the ground. The audience gasped, some believing it was still part of the performance. But as the lion's teeth sank into his shoulder, blood stained the sawdust, and the reality of the situation became horrifyingly clear. The other 2 lions, spurred by the commotion, joined the attack. Their claws raked across Maserati's chest and arms as they circled their fallen trainer. The tent erupted in chaos. Spectators screamed, some fainting, others rushing toward the exits in a frantic attempt to escape. Handlers dashed to the cage, wielding iron bars in a desperate effort to drive the lions back. The gas lamps flickered as shouts and roars filled the air. For several agonizing minutes, the handlers fought to subdue the lions. They struck at the animals with iron bars, attempting to create enough distance to reach Maserati, who had been dragged deeper into the cage. By the time they managed to pull him out, his body was severely mauled, his costume soaked in blood. He was barely alive, his breathing shallow. Witnesses later claimed he tried to speak, his lips moving faintly, but no words came. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after being carried from the tent. The attack left the crowd in shock, and news of the tragedy quickly spread across England. Newspapers chronicled the grisly details, sparking debates over the ethics of lion taming and the treatment of wild animals in captivity. Victorian society, captivated by the spectacle of such performances, was forced to confront the deadly risks faced by the trainers and the animals alike. The lion responsible for the attack, later dubbed McCarthy's lion, became infamous. After its natural death in 1874, the lion was preserved by the taxidermist Roland Ward and displayed in London, where it drew large crowds of curious onlookers. Maserati was buried in the Roman Catholic section of Tongay Cemetery in Bolton, where a white marble cross was erected in his memory. The inscription commemorates the life and bravery of a man who lived and ultimately died on the edge of human ambition and untamed wilderness. His tragic story remains one of the most infamous accounts in circus history, a chilling reminder of the volatile balance between spectacle and survival. Despite McCarthy's tragic death, no immediate regulatory changes were implemented to improve circus safety or address the use of wild animals in performances. At the time, such incidents were seen as occupational hazards rather than warnings for reform. But this assumption would soon be proven wrong in the next story, where a trainer in Russia stepped into the ring with a bear, resulting in a fatal encounter that would shock the world. August 18, 2018 was a sweltering night in southern Louisiana. The heat clung to the air like wet wool, heavy and inescapable, and the dark waters of the Atchafalaya Basin lay still beneath the thick cover of cypress and Spanish moss. Insects hummed in waves, frogs croaked from unseen banks, and something large shifted just beneath the surface. Slow, patient, and perfectly quiet. On nights like these, it's easy to forget how dangerous the swamps can be. But for 28-year-old Deshaun Carter, danger was already on his heels. Deshaun had been on the run for nearly 3 days. A series of armed robberies in Baton Rouge had escalated fast when one turned violent, leaving a bystander wounded, and Deshaun's charges upgraded to attempted murder. He was already out on bond for a carjacking earlier that summer, and this time he knew he wasn't getting another chance. The police had his name, his face, and a warrant in hand. So he ran, first in a stolen car, then on foot, ducking through back roads and service lanes, staying ahead of the sirens by minutes at a time. He wasn't a hardened criminal, he wasn't a mastermind. Deshaun had grown up just outside Baton Rouge, bouncing between low-paying jobs, construction, warehouses, whatever was available. By his mid-20s, he had fallen in with a crew pulling off petty thefts and fast cash scams, always looking for the next score. Most of it was low stakes until it wasn't. No one ever accused him of thinking long-term. His record read like a slow unraveling. And by the time he vanished, even the people closest to him had started to assume he wouldn't be coming back. His luck ran out near a shuttered bait shop south of Henderson. He blew a stop sign and nearly hit a parish deputy. When the cruiser gave chase, Deshaun floored it, but the road was narrow and slick with runoff. After just a few minutes, he lost control, clipped a tree, and bailed into the woods without looking back. The dogs came next, along with floodlights and more vehicles. With no weapon and no plan, he sprinted blindly toward the only escape he saw, the swamp. The Atchafalaya Basin is the largest wetland in the United States, stretching across nearly 1 million acres of southern Louisiana. It's a place where people disappear, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. The terrain is a patchwork of bayous, canals, and swamps so thick with undergrowth and water hazards that even locals tread carefully. Gators, cottonmouths, and wild hogs are common, but it's the gators that rule the water. American alligators are ambush predators, silent, territorial, and incredibly well adapted to the murky wetlands they call home. They rely on stealth rather than speed, often lying motionless just beneath the surface with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. In this position, they can observe their surroundings for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Despite their size, they move with surprising agility, using powerful tails to lunge forward in bursts of speed that can catch even experienced hunters off guard. At night, they become even more dangerous. Low light gives them a tactical advantage, and their sensory organs, particularly the pressure-sensitive receptors on their snouts, allow them to detect even the faintest vibrations in the water. It's during these hours that their natural hunting instincts become most active, and they're more likely to perceive unfamiliar movement as a threat or as a meal. Mature males can grow to over 11 feet long and weigh well over 500 pounds, though larger specimens are not unheard of in remote regions. When they attack, it's with brutal efficiency. They aim to kill quickly, biting down with a force of more than 2,000 pounds per square inch, clamping onto their target and dragging it underwater. From there, they perform what's known as a death roll, a violent twisting motion used to subdue, disorient, or tear apart larger prey. Most animals don't survive the first few seconds, and those that do rarely escape once the roll begins. Deshawn didn't think about any of that when he hit the water. By the time he reached the edge of a narrow canal, he was soaked with sweat and panic. The dogs were behind him, barking furiously somewhere in the trees, and flashlights were sweeping the tree line. Without hesitation, he dove in. The water was warm and thick with algae. Reeds tangled around his legs and the bottom fell away fast. He kicked forward chest deep, trying to keep quiet, trying to stay low. He figured he could make it across, maybe reach the far side and disappear into the woods. What he didn't see was the shape drifting silently toward him from the opposite bank. The gator had been still until then, resting in the shallows beneath a tangle of roots. The movement in the water had caught its attention, and with barely a ripple it closed the distance. Deshawn was halfway across the canal when it struck. The first hit came from the side, fast and violent. The gator lunged upward, jaws open, and slammed into Deshawn's lower back, clamping down across his hip and thigh. He let out a scream that cut through the night. A shrill, panicked sound, but it didn't last long. The gator pulled hard, dragging him under. Deshawn kicked furiously, surfacing once with an arm flailing above the surface. For a second, it looked like he might break free, but then the gator rolled. The spin was brutal. It twisted his torso hard, breaking bone and tearing muscle. His head surfaced briefly, mouth open, eyes wild. He tried to scream again, but the second roll came faster, teeth sinking into his ribs, spinning him deeper. A cloud of blood spread through the reeds as his body went still. His final breath was swallowed by the swamp. Deputies heard the splashing but couldn't see through the thick brush and darkness. Unsure of what had happened or how many people were in the water, they held their position and radioed for assistance. Between the unstable footing, deep water, and the risk of encountering an armed suspect or aggressive wildlife, protocol was to wait for daylight and trained personnel. By the time wildlife officers and recovery crews arrived the next morning, the canal had gone quiet. The only visible signs of a struggle were a torn sneaker tangled in the reeds and a streak of blood along the mud bank. Searchers spent several hours combing the area by boat and from shore, using long poles and thermal equipment to scan beneath the surface. The water was murky, filled with debris, and visibility was limited. After several sweeps turned up nothing, officials began to suspect the presence of a large alligator. When a gator was spotted nearby, circling boats and showing signs of defensive behavior, it was flagged for removal. 2 days later, the same animal was captured and euthanized under public safety guidelines. At just over 11 feet long, the gator's size and proximity made it the likely suspect. An examination confirmed it had consumed human remains. Inside, investigators found part of an arm, shredded fabric, and a partial pelvis, enough to make a positive ID. The recovery was partial and the body was never fully retrieved. But there was no doubt about what had happened. The canal gave up just enough to tell the story, and then it closed again. Deshaun Carter was identified through fingerprints taken during a prior arrest. His mother was contacted by a detective from the local sheriff's office, the same one who had been assigned to locate and arrest him earlier that week. She declined to speak publicly and the funeral was held quietly, attended by only a few family members. The case was closed and the warrant was withdrawn. There was no press conference or major media coverage, just a short mention in the local paper noting that a suspect had died in a suspected alligator attack while fleeing police in the Atchafalaya Basin. The article didn't include quotes from law enforcement or family. It didn't need to. For most, the story was already over. Among the officers involved in the search, reactions were mixed. A few expressed regret privately, others called it an unfortunate outcome but not a surprising one. No one expected a situation like this, but no one seemed particularly shocked either. For the victims of the robberies, store clerks, a delivery driver, and the man injured during the final incident, the news didn't bring much relief. There were no charges filed, no restitution, and no court dates ahead. Just an abrupt end to a case that had barely started. Deshaun didn't die in custody or stand trial. He died alone in the swamp, far from the streets where it all began. And by the time the water went still again, there wasn't much left to bring back. It was January 15th, 2023. The Vermont winter had blanketed the countryside in pristine white snow, transforming Sarah Lawson's 5-acre property into a picturesque scene from a holiday card. For the 38-year-old social worker, the isolated farmhouse represented a fresh start after her divorce 2 years prior. Living alone had its challenges, but Sarah had always been independent and resilient, traits that served her well both in her personal life and in her demanding career helping children in the foster care system. Sarah's farmhouse sat at the edge of a long, winding driveway nearly a mile from her nearest neighbor. She had chosen this property specifically for its privacy and the surrounding natural beauty. The isolation rarely bothered her, except during the harshest winter storms when the power lines went down and the roads became impassable. 6 months earlier, Sarah had decided her home needed one more addition to be complete: a dog. After researching local rescues, she visited Second Chance Animal Shelter, where she first met Max, a 4-year-old Rottweiler Shepherd mix with soulful brown eyes and a gentle demeanor. The shelter staff explained that Max had been surrendered when his previous owner relocated for work. They described him as well-trained and protective without being aggressive, the perfect companion for a woman living alone. What they didn't tell Sarah was that Max had been removed from his previous home by animal control after severely biting a delivery driver. The shelter had made the ethically questionable decision to omit this information, fearing that Max would be euthanized if his history became known. For 6 months, Max proved to be everything Sarah had hoped for. His protective nature made her feel secure in her isolated home, and his affectionate personality provided the companionship she had been missing. Sarah often told friends that adopting Max was the best decision she had made since her divorce. What Sarah couldn't have known was that Max suffered from a rare neurological condition that caused unpredictable episodes of aggression. These episodes were triggered by specific stimuli, particularly high-pitched mechanical sounds, and resulted in temporary but complete personality changes. His previous owner had witnessed 2 such episodes, the second of which resulted in the attack on the delivery driver. The first warning signs appeared in December. Sarah noticed that Max became unusually agitated when she used her blender to make morning smoothies. He would pace anxiously, his ears flattened against his head until the noise stopped. She made a mental note to avoid using the blender when Max was in the kitchen, attributing his reaction to sensitive hearing rather than anything concerning. On January 15th, a severe winter storm had knocked out power and cell service across the region. As evening approached and the snowfall intensified, Sarah decided to prepare a simple dinner using the camping stove she kept for emergencies. Max lay contentedly on his bed in the corner of the kitchen, watching her movements with his usual attentiveness. After dinner, Sarah remembered the frozen berries in her freezer that would spoil if the power remained out overnight. She decided to use her hand-cranked blender to make a berry dessert. As she began turning the crank, the blender emitted a high-pitched whirring sound that echoed through the quiet home. Max's reaction was immediate and alarming. The 95-pound dog leapt to his feet, his body rigid and his eyes suddenly vacant. When she took a step toward him, he growled, a deep, threatening sound she had never heard from him before. Sarah froze, her heart racing as she realized the situation was rapidly deteriorating. In the dim light of her battery-powered lantern, Sarah could see that Max was no longer the gentle companion she knew. His hackles were raised, his lips pulled back to reveal gleaming teeth, and his eyes had no recognition of her. When she slowly backed toward the doorway, Max lunged forward with explosive force, knocking her to the hardwood floor. His powerful jaws clamped down on her forearm as she raised it instinctively to protect her face. The pain was immediate and overwhelming as Max's teeth crushed through muscle and scraped against bone. When she managed to pull her arm free, leaving skin and tissue in his jaws, Max immediately redirected his attack to her throat. She barely managed to get her knee up between them, giving her precious inches of protection as his teeth snapped centimeters from her jugular. With adrenaline surging through her body, Sarah remembered the heavy cast iron pan still sitting on the camping stove. She reached out, her fingers stretching until they grasped the hot handle. Ignoring the searing pain of the burn, she swung the pan with all her strength, connecting with the side of Max's head. The impact momentarily stunned him, allowing Sarah to scramble away and slam the kitchen door shut, trapping the dog inside. Bleeding profusely from her mangled arm and several puncture wounds on her shoulder and neck, Sarah stumbled through the darkened house to her front door. With no cell service and no close neighbors, Sarah faced an impossible choice: remain in the house with an aggressive dog separated only by a hollow interior door, or attempt to reach help through the blizzard. She chose to brave the storm, wrapping her bleeding arm in a kitchen towel and pulling on her coat with her good arm. The moment she stepped outside, the bitter cold and howling wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Sarah pushed forward, each step a struggle through knee-deep snow. The blood loss was making her dizzy and the freezing temperature quickly numbed her extremities. She had managed to travel only a quarter mile down her driveway when her strength finally gave out. Sarah collapsed into the snow, her body no longer able to fight both the severe injuries and the extreme cold. 3 days later, when the roads were finally cleared enough for Sarah's colleague to check on her after she failed to report for work, authorities found a grim scene. Sarah's frozen body was discovered halfway down her driveway, a trail of blood marking her desperate journey through the snow. Inside the house, Max was found still confined to the kitchen, showing no signs of the aggression that had cost his owner her life. The injuries on Sarah's body were consistent with a canine attack. Deep puncture wounds, torn muscle tissue, and defensive marks on her arms. Investigators found blood smears and tufts of fur near the kitchen, along with a dented cast iron pan on the floor. Max's muzzle tested positive for Sarah's DNA, confirming he had bitten her before she fled the house. Subsequent investigation revealed the shelter's deception about Max's history and the uncovered medical records documenting his neurological condition. The case prompted new legislation in Vermont requiring full disclosure of animal bite histories in shelter adoptions. Max was humanely euthanized after examination confirmed an inoperable brain tumor that had likely caused his episodes of aggression. It was August 2nd, 2016. Heat shimmered off the paved roads, turning the city's outskirts into a haze of concrete and golden dust. At the edge of it all, just past the last stretch of highway, sat Balading Wildlife World, a drive-through safari park where visitors could view lions, tigers, and bears from the comfort and supposed safety of their own vehicles. Inside a rented SUV, the Cobb family crawled along the narrow safari roads, windows up, air conditioning on full blast. Natalie, 39, sat in the passenger seat, her sunglasses pushed halfway up her forehead, scanning the map again with quiet frustration. Tom, her husband of 12 years, kept his eyes on the gravel path ahead, his grip on the steering wheel just a little too tight. In the back seat, their 7-year-old daughter Lily leaned into the window, chin in her hands, lost in the wonder of watching zebras lope through the tall grass. On the surface, it looked like a perfect family outing, but inside the car, the air was thick, not just from the heat, but from the things left unsaid. Their marriage had been under strain. The recent move to Beijing for Tom's new job had upended their routines, and tensions that once simmered were now closer to boiling. Today was supposed to be a reset, a family memory, something to hold on to. Instead, it felt like everyone was walking on glass. The safari itself unfolded in slow, lazy scenes. Giraffes moved like shadows through trees. Monkeys watched from overhead. But as the car inched deeper into the predator section, past a warning sign that clearly stated, "Do not exit vehicle under any circumstances," the emotional silence inside the SUV began to fracture. Natalie sighed, folding the map with sharp fingers. She pointed out that Tom missed the left again. Tom didn't respond. She repeated it, and Tom cut her off, saying that he heard her the first time. There was a beat of silence, then she said that maybe she should drive. Tom pulled the car over without a word. Dust swirled around them as the tires stopped near a bend in the road, bordered by waist-high grass and a few scattered trees. In the distance, no animals were visible. It seemed safe. Still stewing, Natalie reached for the door handle. Lily, wide-eyed and still innocent to the tension, looked up from her window. Natalie stepped out. The heat hit her first, then the silence, unnatural, sudden. There were no birds, no animal sounds, just the faint creak of the car settling in the heat. She walked briskly around the front of the vehicle, hair whipping in the dry breeze. The door slammed behind her. And from the tall grass, something stirred. The Siberian tiger, the largest of all tiger subspecies, had been lying low in the undergrowth, hidden by the brush and shadow. Weighing up to 600 pounds and stretching over 10 feet in length, it was a creature built for stealth and power. Its dense orange coat, striped like broken sunlight, blended perfectly into the waving reeds. A natural camouflage evolved for the snowy forest of eastern Russia and northern China. Massive, silent, watching. Its ears twitched at the car door's thud. Its amber eyes locked onto the moving figure. In one breathtaking motion, the tiger leaps from the grass. 10 feet of muscle, claws, and pure instinct. Natalie didn't even have time to scream before the tiger's jaws clamped down on her shoulder, dragging her sideways in a blur of violence. Her legs kicked against the dirt as she was yanked into the grass, her screams sharp and primal, echoing off the quiet hills. Tom lunged out of the car, shouting her name. He ran toward the noise, fist clenched, panic overtaking fear. But the tiger turned, fluid, focused, and swiped. One blow. Tom went down hard, blood on his temple. His cry cut short as the predator turned back to its prey and vanished into the grass with her. Inside the SUV, Lily sat paralyzed, her small hands gripping the door, face pressed against the glass. Through the windshield, she saw flashes of movement, her mother's shoes disappearing into the green, her father lying twisted in the dust. Her voice rose in a trembling scream that no one heard in time. By the time rangers arrived, alerted by surveillance footage and frantic staff watching the live feed, it was already over. Tom and Natalie Cobb were found just yards from the road, both fatally mauled, their final moments violent and brief. Lily was discovered still inside the car, physically unharmed, eyes wide and silent, the aftermath frozen in her memory. The tiger, later tranquilized and relocated within the park, had acted according to its nature. There was no provocation, no mistakes from the animal, only one from the humans. Security footage confirmed it. The moment Natalie opened the door, she stepped across an invisible line that could never be uncrossed. In the official report, it was called a fatal lapse in judgment. To Lily Cobb, it was the day the world changed. Silent, sudden, and forever marked by the sound of tall grass rustling in the wind. August 20th, 1994 was a humid and restless day. The streets of Honolulu, Hawaii buzzed with activity as tourists moved through the vibrant cityscape, snapping photos of palm trees swaying gently against the blue sky. Inside the Neil Blaisdell Arena, the circus was in full swing. Families settled into their seats anticipating a thrilling performance. Children tugged at their parents, pointing excitedly at the sequined performers preparing in the brightly lit ring. The air carried a smell of popcorn and sawdust, mingling with the soft hum of conversation. All eyes would soon turn to Tyke, the show's star elephant. But what unfolded next would leave the crowd scrambling for safety and the city reeling from chaos. 21-year-old Tyke was no ordinary circus elephant. Born in the wilds of Mozambique, she was separated from her herd as a calf and sold into the entertainment industry. Her early years were a mystery, but by the late 1980s, she had become part of the Hawthorne Corporation, a company infamous for its use of exotic animals in circuses. Over the years, Tyke was trained to perform elaborate routines, but the methods used on her were harsh and relentless. Handlers relied on strict control, often through physical punishment to force obedience. Incidents of unrest had followed Tyke throughout her career. In North Dakota, she had bolted from a circus enclosure and roamed the town before being recaptured. In Pennsylvania, she had charged at trainers during a rehearsal, injuring one. Each event was seen as a fluke, dismissed by her handlers as manageable behavior from an animal under stress. But Tyke's repeated outburst hinted at a deeper turmoil, a resistance to the unnatural life forced upon her. By the time Tyke arrived in Honolulu for the Circus International performance, her agitation was evident to those who knew elephants well. Her ears flapped, her body swayed, and her trunk moved with restless energy. Subtle but unmistakable signs of unease. Yet for the crowd filling the seats that afternoon, she was simply the star attraction, her enormous frame draped in colorful fabric, a living spectacle of exotic majesty. Inside her enclosure, Tyke shifted her weight, her massive feet pressing into the ground as her handlers moved purposefully around her. Alan Campbell, her trainer, and Dallas Beckwith, her groomer, prepared her for the routine that had been rehearsed so many times before. Each action appeared practiced, but the elephant's movements, swaying, flapping, circling, hinted at a tension that no amount of preparation could contain, and that Campbell and Beckwith seemed to ignore. When Tyke entered the ring, the audience erupted in applause. Her deliberate, lumbering steps and towering frame commanded attention under the arena's bright lights. Guided by Campbell's cues, she lifted her trunk, turned in slow circles, and crouched gracefully, earning delighted cheers. Yet beneath the seamless routine, the signs of unrest were growing. As the routine progressed, Beckwith moved closer, signaling her next trick. Tyke's movements slowed, her body tensing as her trunk froze mid-motion. In a flash, she lashed out, striking Beckwith with staggering force and sending him sprawling to the ground. A collective gasp echoed through the arena, quickly replaced by screams as Tyke reared up, her massive feet crashing down on his still form. Campbell rushed forward shouting commands, but Tyke turned on him with terrifying speed, her tusks leading the charge. He fell backwards lifeless as she battered him with her trunk, her immense weight following. leaving the crowd in stunned, panicked silence. Screams echoed across the arena. Parents pulled their children toward the exits, pushing past others in the rush to escape. Tyke moved erratically, smashing props and charging toward the edge of the ring. The performers and staff scrambled for safety, leaving the arena floor empty except for the elephant and the devastation she had caused. Tyke pressed forward, crashing through barriers and forcing her way into the backstage corridors. A loud crash marked her escape into the streets of Honolulu. Outside, she moved quickly, her feet pounding against the pavement. Cars halted as drivers spotted her towering figure. Several vehicles reversed, tires squealing, as she continued her path. By now, police and animal control officers had arrived. They trailed her cautiously, shouting to bystanders to stay back. Officers aimed tranquilizer darts, but to no avail. The darts seemed to have no effect, and she continued moving through intersections and sidewalks. As Tyke turned into a busier area, officers began to fire their handguns. Her movements slowed only briefly before she surged forward again, charging toward the noise and commotion. Police vehicles formed a blockade ahead, and additional shots were fired. The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets, drawing onlookers who watched from behind walls and parked cars. Near a waterfront park, Tyke's pace finally slowed. Her legs buckled as she stumbled forward, collapsing heavily onto the asphalt. Her breathing became shallow before it ceased entirely. The gunfire stopped and the street fell silent except for the murmurs of officers and onlookers gathering at a distance. Tyke's massive body lay motionless, surrounded by a cordon of police vehicles. After receiving a staggering 87 shots from police officers, Tyke's rampage had ended. By the time the scene was secured, dozens of officers and emergency personnel were on site. The aftermath left Campbell dead, Beckwith severely injured, and many bystanders and innocent civilians hurt. The damaged streets bore tire marks, shattered debris, and overturned signs. Tyke's rampage ended there, but her final moments lingered in the stunned expressions of those who witnessed it. Her enormous presence now reduced to an immobile silhouette against the gray asphalt. It was July 28, 2015. The Texas summer sun blazed down on the small town of Glen Rose. Elijah DuPont, 33, had been planning this trip for weeks. It was a rare day off from work, and he couldn't wait to spend some one-on-one time with his 6-year-old son, Max. The excitement had been building between them for days. Their first adventure into the safari park felt like an opportunity to step outside of the confines of their daily lives and escape into nature, just the two of them. Elijah was the kind of father who cherished moments like this. He wasn't just a provider, he was a hands-on dad who shared everything he could with Max, whether it was fishing at the lake or building model planes. Today was supposed to be another adventure, one to add to the growing list of memories. They'd been to zoos before, but this was different. At the safari park, the animals roamed freely, and for a few hours, they would be in the presence of creatures that felt closer to the wild. As they moved through the park, Max pressed his small face against the window, his wide eyes fixed on the giraffes grazing nearby. Eliza glanced over at him, smiling softly. It was a good day, the kind of day he had envisioned, a day for bonding. They were enjoying the sights and sounds of the park when they came to a small picnic area beside the baboon enclosure. The trees offered welcome shade, and Elijah found a spot to park under their cool cover. He had no reason to be concerned. The baboons seemed curious but not threatening. The windows remained slightly cracked, just enough for a breeze to filter in. The car felt like a safe haven, a cocoon from the animals outside. Elijah unwrapped their sandwiches, the faint chatter of the baboons in the distance blending with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the baboons weren't simply curious, they were opportunists. As the baboon troop grew closer, their chatter shifted in pitch, becoming more excited, more urgent. Elijah, still blissfully unaware, took a bite of his sandwich, the soft sound of Max's voice pointing out the animals, distracting him from the increasing clamor outside. A few moments passed before a large, aggressive baboon began to move toward the car. Its eyes were locked on the food inside. For a moment, it paused, unsure, but then, with sudden decisiveness, it reached up and began pulling at the rear window. Despite their often playful appearance, baboons are incredibly strong primates capable of inflicting serious harm. Males can weigh over 80 pounds and possess canine teeth longer than a lion's. Elijah's focus snapped from Max to the sound of glass groaning under pressure. The window lowered just enough for the baboon to slip inside. The moment the baboon's claws clicked against the doorframe, everything changed. A low growl, the creak of the door, and the sound of fabric being ripped filled the air. Within seconds, the inside of the car transformed from sanctuary to trap. More baboons followed, crowding through the window. Elijah's breath quickened, panic setting in. He reached out instinctively to shield Max, pulling him closer as the baboons swarmed. Their claws tore at Elijah's skin, and their sharp teeth sank into him. Max screamed, his voice rising in desperation, but his father's attempts to push him deeper into the seat were futile. The small space of the car, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Elijah's arms were scratched and bloodied as the baboons swarmed. The desperate sound of ripping fabric filled the air, mixing with the baboon's screeches and Max's frantic sobs. Elijah's heart raced. Every instinct screamed to protect his son, but the animals were fast, overwhelming him. In those final moments, as he fought to keep Max safe, the chaos intensified. The baboons, driven by hunger and instinct, dragged Elijah toward the open window, their relentless assault impossible to stop. The sound of Max's terrified voice, Elijah's panicked cries, and the baboon's shrill screams all blended together in a terrifying cacophony. By the time the park staff reached them, Elijah had already lost too much blood. The baboons had retreated back into the trees, leaving only the horrific silence that followed their retreat. Max, still crouched in the back seat, was alive but covered in the remnants of the chaos. He had been unable to help, too scared to do anything but watch. But the steel frame of the car had protected him. His tiny body, trembling with shock, was a stark contrast to the silence that now filled the air. Elijah, however, was beyond saving. The staff rushed Max away, trying to shield him from the gruesome scene. Paramedics arrived too late, their efforts futile. Elijah DuPont's tragic death was a painful reminder of the dangers posed by wild animals, even in places meant to protect them. The primal terror of the attack left Max frozen, his silence in the aftermath a heartbreaking testament to the loss of the father he would never see again. March 12, 2008 broke cool and still across the granite ridges of Matabo Hills in southern Zimbabwe. The sun was just beginning to warm the rock outcrops that jutted from the brush, ancient formations carved by time and wind into natural sentinels overlooking the valleys below. Baobab trees reached their twisted limbs skyward, and shadows lingered in the hollows where leopards liked to rest. This wasn't open savanna. It was closed country, tight, rocky, and perfect for ambush predators. And it was here that a 47-year-old man named Lennox Barad rose before dawn to prepare for the kind of hunt no one took lightly. Lennox had grown up in nearby Kezi, just east of the park boundary. He wasn't a trophy hunter nor a tourist. He was a seasoned bushman, a tracker, and a licensed hunter who often assisted the park's department when local wildlife grew too bold. Quiet and even-tempered, Lennox was well known in the region as a man who knew the land, and more importantly, the animals that lived on it. He'd hunted baboons that raided crops, warthogs that tore through fences, and on more than one occasion, problem leopards that had gotten too comfortable near the villages. His respect for the bush was hard-earned. He didn't brag, he didn't rush, but this time something had gone wrong. Over the past week, 3 goats had been taken from a small homestead just beyond the basalt ridge that separated the forest edge from cultivated fields. The signs were clear: claw marks, drag trails, and a half-eaten carcass left hanging in the fork of a tree. Only one animal did that. A call went out to Lennox. He arrived that afternoon with a small team, 2 junior trackers and a bolt-action Rigby rifle chambered in .275, ideal for the terrain. They set bait, mounted a hide, and waited. At dusk on the second day, movement stirred behind the thorn bush near the bait pile. Lennox raised the rifle and fired. The shot hit, but not cleanly. The leopard bolted into the rocks, a dark blur swallowed by stone and shadow. Blood drops dotted the trail. The trackers wanted to wait until morning, but Lennox insisted they follow. Time was critical. A wounded leopard didn't leave itself vulnerable. It doubled back, found cover, and waited. And when it struck, it didn't bluff, it went for the throat. The African leopard is not the largest of the big cats, but pound for pound, it's one of the most formidable. Adult males weigh between 130 and 200 pounds, but their muscular build allows them to haul prey twice their size into trees. Their retractable claws are razor sharp. Their bite force is nearly 700 psi, more than enough to sever tendons or crush windpipes. And unlike lions that often roar or posture before charging, leopards strike in silence. In rocky terrain like Matabo, they're nearly invisible until they move. Lennox followed the blood trail past a collapsed gully and into a thicket of jumbled rocks and scrub. The trail turned sharply up a slope where granite boulders stacked like stairs beneath a steep overhang. The cat was nowhere in sight. He stepped forward slowly, eyes scanning the brush ahead. Behind him, the trackers fanned out in a cautious arc, rifles raised. No one saw what waited above. The leopard had doubled back and climbed into a ledge hidden by sun and shadow. It was bleeding heavily from the haunches, but alive, barely, and full of adrenaline. As Lennox passed beneath, it dropped. It landed hard, its full weight slamming into Lennox's back with the force of a dropped boulder. The leopard's jaws locked instantly onto the base of his neck, teeth diving into muscle and artery in one crushing bite. The two tumbled downslope in a chaotic blur of claws, dust, and broken bush. As they rolled, the impact cracked one of Lennox's ribs and drove the breath from his lungs. He hit the ground with a wet thud, stunned but conscious, and reached for his rifle with fingers already slick with blood. The barrel scraped rock as he tried to lift it, but the cat was already on top of him again. Its claws tore into his shoulder and raked down across his ribcage, leaving open flesh in their wake. Lennox kicked, twisted, fought, but his body was losing strength by the second. Blood pooled quickly in the dust beneath him, and the leopard, driven by pain and instinct, shook him once, twice, then let go. A shout rang out from the rocks above. The trackers, panicked and out of position, fired warning shots into the air to try and scare the cat. But it didn't bolt. It limped a few steps away, growled low and hoarse, and collapsed near the roots of a stone fig tree, its chest heaving with the final effort of a dying predator that had made sure not to die alone. The recovery was frantic and desperate. The trackers scrambled downslope through thorn and loose stone, rifles still raised as they approached the blood-darkened clearing. They reached Lennox within seconds, but the scene was already still. His eyes were glassy, his mouth slightly open, and his body limp against the dirt. One man pressed fingers to his neck and whispered something, but there was no pulse. The artery had been severed cleanly. Blood loss had been rapid and total, less than a minute, and nothing more could be done. There was no time for grief. The men moved quickly, wrapping Lennox's body in a canvas poncho and lashing together a makeshift litter of mopane branches to carry him down the ridge. The leopard's body was found a short distance away, already stiff, sprawled against the rocks in a final sprawl of exertion. Its original wound had torn through the hindquarters and bled it out slowly, but not before it had turned back for a last strike. The animal was photographed, tagged for official records, and retrieved later by wildlife authorities. In the weeks that followed, no mount was requested, no hide was displayed. Lennox's death was classified as a fatal wildlife incident, and the investigation confirmed everything had been done by the book. But policy changed. No more solo tracking within ambush terrain. No more pursuit of injured predators without perimeter control. His funeral was held 3 days later beneath the shade of a mopane tree near his family's home. Neighbors came in from across the district, many on foot, to pay their respects. No one spoke loudly, no one called it bad luck. They called it what it was: the price of underestimating an animal that had made silence its greatest weapon. For all his skill and experience, Lennox had made one critical mistake. He looked ahead but not above, and in that high country of rocks and dust, that was all it took. February 6, 2021 was a dry, blistering day on the southwest coast of Western Australia. By early afternoon, the temperature had risen above 38 degrees Celsius, and the remote beaches south of Margaret River sat largely empty. Just beyond the tree line of Borenup Forest, one of those beaches, unmarked, unpatrolled, and rarely visited, stretched out along the coastline. A rough dirt track led through low, scrubbing dunes to a narrow crescent of pale sand where the water remained calm, undisturbed, and open. A white van pulled in and parked near the trail that afternoon. It was an older model with peeling paint and no rear seats, the kind commonly used for temporary work or travel. The driver, 20-year-old Callum Price, had no fixed address. He had been staying in the van for several days. His name was known to police in Perth, where he had recently failed to appear in court on multiple charges, including burglary, assault, and possession of a prohibited weapon. His criminal record dated back to his teenage years, with a long list of minor and mid-level offenses. His most recent charge involved a violent break-in that left one man hospitalized. Rather than turn himself in, Callum had left the city and headed south. He arrived at the beach alone. There were no other vehicles on the track behind him and no footprints on the sand ahead. The sun had begun its descent, but the heat lingered, trapped in the scrub and dry coastal air. A dry wind passed over the dunes, rustling the grass in the shallow troughs between them, and waves rolled in quietly along the narrow shoreline. The beach sat hidden behind a dense wall of bushland and limestone, far from public access points, with no lifeguards, no patrols, and no signage beyond a faded marker several kilometers back, warning against swimming in unmonitored areas. Callum parked the van near a clearing just off the sand and walked the final stretch to the water. He left his clothes and backpack on a flat rock shelf near the high tide line. Inside the bag were his phone, wallet, a bottle of water, and a court summons issued in Perth weeks earlier. The van had become unbearably hot, and with no shade, no fan, and nowhere else to go, the water offered the only real relief. He hadn't planned to swim far, just cool off, maybe float for a while before deciding what to do next. The shoreline was steep and curved between two low headlands, offering no visibility from the road or neighboring beaches. The tide was mid-level and slow, with only a gentle breeze moving the surface. The water was clear and warm. He waded out past the break and began swimming beyond the shallows, crossing the gentle inner reef within a few minutes. From there, the ocean floor dropped away sharply. The bright turquoise color faded into a deeper blue-green as the bottom disappeared beneath him. He kept swimming. The area was known to locals but rarely visited, especially late in the day. It bordered a region frequently monitored by marine scientists for large predator activity. Southern and Western Australia form one of the world's major habitats for great white sharks, drawn by rich feeding grounds filled with seals, rays, and migratory fish. These sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth. Mature adults can reach over 5 meters in length and weigh more than 2 tons. Their bodies are built for short bursts of acceleration, allowing them to ambush prey from below with devastating speed and power. A single bite from a great white is enough to incapacitate most animals. Their jaws, lined with serrated teeth and driven by over 4,000 pounds of pressure, are capable of tearing through bone and muscle in one motion. The water beyond the reef was silent. There were no boats offshore, no visible movement on the beach. The van behind the dunes was out of sight now, and the rocky shoreline had long since vanished from view. Callum treaded water just beyond the drop-off, surrounded by open sea. The current was mild. The only sound was the rhythmic splash of his arms and the gentle slap of water against his skin. Below, near the shadowed edge of the reef shelf, a large figure moved through the water. Its approach was slow, deliberate, and unseen. Great whites often rely on patience in their final approach, using the element of surprise to maximize the impact of their first strike. From beneath, the shape above would have appeared as a lone silhouette, small, isolated, and vulnerable. It moved within range. The shark surged upward in a sudden, powerful burst. The first bite struck across Callum's lower body, shearing through his thigh and hip with catastrophic force. The impact lifted him partially out of the water before dragging him under. A burst of blood spread outward in thick ribbons, turning the clear sea dark. He surfaced again, struggling to stay upright, but the shark had already begun to turn. The second strike clamped across his torso and shook him violently from side to side before pulling him below for the final time. From the shore, the surface of the sea looked untouched, flat, blue, and quiet. A pair of hikers moving along the dunes had paused earlier to glance out at the water. They'd seen a splash, distant and brief, but nothing followed. No shouting, no sign of struggle, just the same unbroken rhythm of waves rolling in beneath the late afternoon sun. They continued walking, unaware that anything had happened at all. The beach remained empty through the evening. The van sat undisturbed just beyond the tree line, its windows cracked slightly in the heat, but no one approached it. By morning it was still there, parked at an odd angle and coated in a thin film of dust. A local resident passing by for an early walk noticed that the same vehicle hadn't moved since the previous day. Curious, they followed the trail down to the shoreline and found a backpack, shoes, and clothing laid out neatly on the rocks, still untouched. The tide had come and gone, but the belongings hadn't been moved or claimed. Concerned, the resident contacted local authorities. Police arrived shortly after sunrise. The van was still parked in the same spot. The engine was cold and the keys were inside. Callum's phone and wallet were in his bag, along with a court summons and half-empty bottle of water. Marine search crews and drones were deployed along the coastline by mid-morning. Small boats scanned the inshore waters and a shoreline sweep began at first light the next day. For 3 days, crews combed more than 15 miles of coastline by land, sea, and air. On the second day of the search, a torn piece of wetsuit neoprene was recovered from a rocky inlet north of the beach. The third day brought the only confirmed human remains, a femur, stripped of tissue and bearing scoring consistent with shark-inflicted trauma. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Callum Price. Tracking data from tagged sharks showed that a large great white had moved through the area less than 48 hours prior to the incident. No animal was located or destroyed. The species is protected under Australian law and may not be culled without direct threat to human life. The beach was closed for 7 days and then reopened with advisory signs warning of potential shark activity. There was no public funeral and no statement released by Callum's family. A short article in a local newspaper mentioned his name in passing, noting that charges had been dropped due to death verification. Officials recorded the incident as an unprovoked shark fatality, one of only a handful that year. The beach where it happened remained open. A warning sign was posted at the access path, but no patrols were added and the area saw little attention in the weeks that followed. The van was towed, held briefly, then quietly scrapped. No memorial was built, no vigil held. Whatever came after was private, and whatever had happened in those final moments remained there. Just one more disappearance in a place where the sea doesn't always give back. The ocean took one fugitive without warning. It was December 23, 2021. Just one day before her 22nd birthday, Jacqueline Durand was looking forward to celebrating the holidays with her boyfriend Nathan and her family. The University of Texas at Dallas student had much to be grateful for as the year came to a close. She was excelling in her supply chain management program, her dog-sitting business was thriving, and she and Nathan had recently moved past his cancer battle with a renewed appreciation for life. Jacqueline's love for dogs had been the defining passion of her life since childhood. She often shared stories about her father's golden retriever from her early years, describing how she would stare at the dog in fascination and lie beside it when she was barely a toddler. Though the dog passed away when she was only about 18 months old, Jacqueline maintained that this early connection sparked her lifelong fascination with canines. This passion eventually led her to start her own dog-sitting business while in college. With her warm smile and gentle demeanor, Jacqueline quickly built a reputation as a reliable and caring dog sitter in her community. She had a natural way with animals that seemed almost magical to those who witnessed it. Even the most anxious or difficult dogs would calm in her presence. She frequently expressed her belief that dogs could sense good people and recognize genuine affection. When not studying or caring for her clients' pets, Jacqueline enjoyed hiking with Nathan and volunteering at local animal shelters. She dreamed of one day becoming a therapy dog trainer after graduation, hoping to help people experiencing trauma or illness to find comfort through the healing presence of dogs. The irony of this dream would not be lost on those who knew her story. Jacqueline's relationship with Nathan had deepened during his cancer treatment. Their shared experience of facing mortality at such a young age had given them both a perspective on life that few of their peers could understand. They had recently begun discussing marriage, planning a future together that would combine their shared love of animals and desire to help others. On that December evening, Jacqueline was scheduled to begin a dog-sitting job for Dr. Justin Bishop and his wife Ashley in Coppell, Texas. The couple owned 3 dogs, including Lucy, a German Shepherd mix weighing about 65 pounds, and Bender, a Pit Bull mix weighing approximately 90 pounds. Following her professional protocol, Jacqueline had previously met the dogs during a required meet and greet session. She later described how the dogs had appeared completely friendly during this initial meeting, noting that they had calmly sat on the couch while she spoke with their owner, showing no concerning behaviors whatsoever. What she didn't notice during that initial visit was the ominous sign on the Bishop's front door that read, "Crazy dogs, please don't knock or ring the bell. Call or text instead." This silent warning suggested the owners were well aware of their pet's dangerous tendencies. The Bishops had been desperately seeking a dog sitter for the Christmas holidays, posting in a local Facebook group about their first family Christmas vacation in nearly 2 decades. They had texted Jacqueline earlier that day, informing her that, contrary to their usual practice, they had left the dogs outside their kennels. This seemingly minor detail would prove catastrophic. As Jacqueline approached the house that evening, she had no inkling of the horror that awaited her. She had texted Nathan that she would call him after getting the dogs settled, planning to finalize their birthday dinner plans for the following evening. With her usual confidence around animals, she unlocked the front door of the Bishop's home. The moment the door swung open, chaos erupted. Lucy and Bender charged at Jacqueline with unexpected savagery, their eyes wild with aggression. Within seconds, they knocked her to the ground with such force that her phone, keys, and purse scattered across the floor. The dog's attack was merciless as they dragged her from the front foyer into the living room, their powerful jaws tearing at her flesh. Later, Jacqueline would describe the horrifying sensation of feeling her skin hanging from her face and believing she was going to die. The bloodthirsty animals ripped at her with such violence that they tore off all her clothing, including her blue jeans. Their jaws clamped down on her face, tearing away her ears, nose, lips, and most of her facial features below her eyes. Over 800 bites covered her body as she drifted in and out of consciousness on the living room floor, her blood soaking into the carpet beneath her. As the attack continued, Jacqueline's thoughts turned to her loved ones. She would later describe losing all hope of survival as she lay on the rug, her most painful thought being that she wouldn't see her family again and hadn't had the chance to tell them that she loved them. The pain was excruciating, but eventually her body began to shut down as shock set in. The only reason help arrived was due to sheer luck. When the dogs dragged Jacqueline into the house, the front door remained open, triggering the home security system. The alarm company notified the Bishops, who asked a neighbor to check on their house. When the neighbor approached, one of the dogs rushed out and bit her as well, though her injuries were minor compared to Jacqueline's. The neighbor's husband immediately dialed 911. When police arrived at the scene, they faced a horrifying dilemma captured on body cam footage. They could see Jacqueline through the doorway, but the aggressive dogs prevented them from entering. One officer can be heard on the footage explaining that they couldn't enter because of the dogs. The officers stood helplessly outside, knowing a young woman was being mauled to death just feet away. It took an agonizing 37 minutes from the time officers arrived until paramedics could safely enter the home. By then, Jacqueline had lost 30% of the blood in her body. When emergency responders finally reached her, they found her clinging to life, her body mutilated beyond recognition. Jacqueline later recalled seeing emergency lights reflecting on the wall as she lay there. She described how she consciously slowed her breathing to conserve oxygen and heard commotion outside, realizing that rescue was imminent. Rushed to a level 1 trauma center, Jacqueline was immediately placed in a medically induced coma. During surgery, doctors had to resuscitate her 4 times as they fought to save her life. She remained in the coma for over a week, unaware that she had survived the brutal attack. When she finally awoke in January 2022, Jacqueline faced the devastating reality of her injuries. Her face had been catastrophically disfigured. Her ears, nose, and lips were gone. Her cheeks had been torn away, and she had hundreds of puncture wounds across her body. Despite the unimaginable trauma, Jacqueline's spirit remained unbroken. Over the following months, she underwent 18 surgeries to reconstruct her face. Throughout her recovery, her boyfriend Nathan never left her side. When she expressed concerns about her changed appearance, Nathan reassured her of his unwavering commitment. The dogs that attacked Jacqueline were later euthanized, and she filed a lawsuit against the Bishops for negligence. The lawsuit alleged that the couple knew their dogs were dangerous but failed to properly secure them or warn Jacqueline of the true extent of the risk. Thanks for watching this compilation. Not done watching yet? Click on the next video right now.